L.A. Doyle, Toronto Police Services, 1981 to 2013. L.A. is one of the many law enforcement officers I have interviewed in the United States and Canada. She's Canadian. Had an amazing career as a woman in Toronto, and she tells a gripping, inspiring, and a very courageous story. And I thank you, L.A., for that time you gave me back in 2015, June 2nd, 2015, in Woodbridge, Ontario, Canada. And I'd like to thank Cameron Ward at Ward Funeral Homes in Ontario. Cameron, thank you for sponsoring the interviews that we did and the 2 films that you helped me produce. Just a special thank you to you, and for making LA's story available now to the world. And so I'd like to invite those of you watching these videos to consider sponsoring one of these many stories. I say it every time I come on here in the beginning of a video, but it's very important. You know, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that has gone into these projects, a lot of work, a lot of resources required, and I would really encourage you, if you're getting something out of these videos, to consider sponsoring one of the stories. You can contact me. There's information in the video description. LarryCapetto.com is my website. There's information there. You can contact me there. But I'm thrilled. This is my first full law enforcement story. I worked in law enforcement years ago, but never had my career. And so through the eyes and ears of all these men and women I've interviewed, I'm learning and experiencing what they went through firsthand. And so I'm really happy and excited to share this story with you. LA has PTSD, and she shares some about post-traumatic stress and reaches out to other officers who might be struggling with that. So this is a very, very vital story. And like with all my military stories, with every page of history lost, these stories become more valuable and more precious. So God bless you, LA, out there today working, helping other people. And Cameron Ward, again, thank you for sponsoring these interviews. And I'm happy to present to you my full interview with L.A. Doyle. God bless you. L.A., thank you for this opportunity to hear your story. It's great being back in Canada again. What year did you go into law enforcement?
1981, March 3rd, 1981.
So what was the initial draw or interest? Why did you want a career in law enforcement?
My family, my father's history. He was with the homicide unit, and I would read his pathology reports and 1,800-page dossier of each case, and I found it fascinating, and I wanted to do that type of work. However, my main goal was really to go into law, so I thought I would do policing for a few years to make enough money to go to law school.
Did you have to go through a police academy?
Yes, COBIT College was the Toronto Police College at the time, as well as the Ontario Police College in Aylmer, Ontario. Had to do both of those, but I started as a cadet. I was 17 when I started. So I was very young. I was one of the first civilians for a position at the front desk to be able to meet and deal with the public in a pilot project as a cadet in a regular division. So I started very young in a very busy environment.
So there weren't many women then back at that time?
About 100. About 100.
What do you think there is today?
I believe it's about 1,100.
So tell me, L.A., did you start in patrol like everybody else usually does?
I started at 52 Division at the front desk, but I also did tagging duties, and I walked a beat, and I was responsible for an area post as a cadet for the first couple of years of my career. And then, like most cadets, I went to other units just to be well-rounded. So I did some in serving, but I also had the incredible privilege of working at headquarters in the museum, and I loved that portion of my career. It was very informative of history and folklore and Toronto history and just the progression of policing. It was fabulous.
How many years was your career again?
Well, I retired at 32 years, 8 months. However, I got hurt, so I didn't fulfill my time on the job, I had sick time.
32 years, wow, that's incredible.
I wish I could say it was all on duty, but like I said, I got hurt.
So do you have fond memories of the beginning days? Those first few years, are they fond memories?
Extremely, both ends of the continuum. Very fond. I enjoyed the personalities I worked with for the most part. I enjoyed the adrenaline, the excitement, the interesting scenarios that would happen minute by minute, often hour by hour, and no day was ever the same. And I was in a high energy, high crime area to start, so I learned very rapidly. But I was also on a very sad shift. My Shift B platoon at 52 Division had lost an officer in the line of duty about a year before I joined, and so each person on my shift manifested grief and somewhat traumatic effect because of that when I first started. So that was an education for me that really affected me for the rest of my life.
Can you tell me a little bit about what happened? Was it a shooting or just what happened?
It's Michael Sweet. It's a notorious or infamous sad homicide, really, of an officer who attended an alarm call on Queen Street, a daytime alarm call. And he walked in the back door during day shift, and he was met by the Monroe brothers, who are very vicious criminals, and he was shot in the chest. But it was a non-fatal wound, and he went down, and his partner radioed for help, and it was now a hostage negotiation. And there was some concern about the command post who was going to be taking charge of that crime scene and negotiating. Was it the duty desk staff inspector, or was it going to be the emergency task force? So during the time that they were deciding, Michael Sweet bled out and perished due to his injuries. So there was a lot of controversy and anger on top of the loss for many officers on my shift, and angry at authority, angry at the bureaucracy, and of course deeply saddened by their loss of fellow friend and co-worker. So when I came onto the shift, this is when I saw everyone deal with trauma in their own unique individual way, some more drastically than others. And at 17 years old, it was a real life experience. Mm-hmm.
L.A., what did you like best about being a police officer?
At the time when I was working, I really enjoyed my platoon, the humor, the camaraderie, the intense teamwork, the ability to work as a unit, to be involved, be invited into a member of the public's most vulnerable crisis, and hopefully make it a better situation by the time we left. So it's that interaction at a time of need. It was the opportunity to bring someone before the courts for justice and just hopefully make a difference and make a bad situation somewhat more beneficial because of our involvement. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
I don't think I've ever asked this before, but do you remember the first person that you arrested?
I absolutely do, yeah. It was
Was it my mom?
Well, that's funny you should say that. She was probably similar to a second arrest I had. I'm just kidding. No, the first one was a foot chase in Nathan Phillips Square, and it was for armed robbery, and my partner was older and slower, and I was younger and faster, just by luck of the draw, and I got there first and got to arrest.
Was it a male?
It was, yes.
So you knocked him to the ground like you see on TV, and you read him his rights, and you handcuffed him?
Pretty much, yeah.
What do you say in Canada, like in the States? Do you read him his Miranda rights?
It's very similar. Well, we read it to be absolutely 100% sure, but you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be held against you in the court of law. But we read it specifically from our memo book. My second arrest was an 87-year-old grandma selling drugs from her front door. So that was, and I was ordered to do that arrest.
87 years old. My mom is 87.
She came into the station with her walker. I think you have to have a sense of humor in policing. I was told by the detective office I had to accompany them, and I was the one that was going to put cuffs on her. And yeah, I was cutting my teeth with hardened criminal.
Did you take out your iPhone and take a picture with her?
There were no iPhones when I was working.
I'm kidding with you. What kind of picture would that have been?
Humiliating.
Crime doesn't pay. That's a great story.
Yeah. She was very successful, and like, who suspected a granny? It was awesome cover.
You know the picture you showed me of you, were you called a constable back then?
One was with my partner in my scout car, and the second one was my graduation.
When you look at those pictures, LA, what do you think about? What goes through your mind?
Well, both have very different emotions for me. I very much enjoyed working with my partner at the time, Dave Good. He was professional, he was smart, he was intuitive, incredibly lucky. We never had 5 minutes peace when we worked together. There was always something happening right in front of us. It was a high crime area, and you were really blessed if you had a chance to have a cup of coffee in peace, because you just have to open your eyes and there was so much happening around. Plus, we took pride in our number of calls and number of reports that we did during a shift. We wanted to be high producers and good arrests, so we were diggers, and I enjoyed that time working with him. We seemed to get very unusual calls and a lot more than our average, DOAs, and well, it's a busy area, so you got a well-rounded plate full of interesting calls every single shift. So we worked well together. We really understood each other's eye language and body language. We didn't have to say a lot to be in a situation. I always knew what he was going to do next, and vice versa.
15 Division?
31.
That's downtown?
It's more northwest part of Toronto. It's 39 low income complexes in a 2-mile square area. So it's very condensed. Poverty, drugs, single parent families.
That's known as a tough area.
Yes. Yeah.
LA, what was the most difficult part of your job?
Hardest part of the job was dealing with some of the dysfunction from the officers. If they didnண்ட் handle their stress well, some were pretty abusive. And I was for 6 years, I was not confirmed in my rank because I was a cadet, and then I was a probationary officer. So you're constantly at the bottom of the pecking order. So you had to tolerate and not say a lot, just put up and with the treatment and just stiff upper lip and move on. So in that regard, that was a little tough because some of the treatment was abusive, actually.
If I was to ask you what was a good call back then, what comes to mind?
So good in a police sense where you would have good results, or?
Good like, did you ever deliver a baby or pull somebody from a burning car? What I mean is a good call by something that ended good.
Well, it's pretty tough work in that area. So I think maybe multiple injuries at a crosswalk. It was in the middle of the night and kids had just finished coming from a party, and 6 of them were run down in a crosswalk on a very busy street. And just being able to be first on scene and comfort them, and till the ambulance got there, they were seriously wounded, and we weren't sure if a few of them would pass on or actually live. But to give comfort to scared kids in the middle of the night, and there were so many of them. Also, the Barrie tornado, I was part of the search and rescue, and that was a profound opportunity to just bring encouragement and comfort to people who are grieving the loss of their homes and their pets, and in some cases their neighbors. So it was a profound opportunity. Plus I got a chance in that tornado to find things that came from about 45 miles away, intact, which was incredibly interesting. I found a jewelry case that had gone through a tornado in the other town and landed in my patrol zone. And I opened it up and there was a diamond set of earrings and a pendant, all intact. It was beyond explanation. And a telephone with the area code from 45 miles away. And that was pretty incredible.
I know there are many difficult calls in your career, but if I was to ask you what was a difficult call, what comes to mind?
I got called because I was a female officer. I would get called often to search female prisoners. And at one point, the arresting officer hadn't done a thorough search. When I went into the room, I knew that she had been charged with credit card fraud, which is generally white collar type of crime and not considered to be a major threat of violence. But when I asked her to remove her clothing for a search, she pulled a switchblade on me and stuck it in my throat. And I was against the door and I couldn't get out, and I didn't think I was going to make it out of that room. And through the grace of God, literally, she listened to me and she put the knife down and I got out. So that was an interesting call. Another call, same type of thing, searching female prisoners. I was asked to go to a different division in the middle of the night, and it was for an assault. It was a domestic violence scenario, and it was a woman under arrest for assaulting her common-law husband. And during the middle of the search, I get a knock on the door, and they said, just so you know, this has gone from a major assault to a homicide, so please take note and accommodate the situation. And that was very interesting because when I spoke to her, she confessed the entire scenario to me, and that was profound for me. I was still in training, actually, so I felt, thankfully, I had read my father's briefs on homicide investigation and how to conduct interviews, and that came in very helpful and very practical for that particular moment. She was convicted, and the court did have leniency on her, thankfully, due to her confession and her testimony.
Allie, were you ever involved in a shooting?
I've been in nightclubs where there were shots fired, and when I arrived on scene, there were still shots fired. The danger in that regard was more the crowd rushing the exits as we were rushing in. It was a stampede of people trampling each other, and we're trying to go against the stream. So the shooter was only shooting to show off his weapon and be a big shot. It wasn't at anyone. However, ricochet and fractions of fragments were dangerous, but I've never been in a shooting per se.
Do you see a difference between the policing in the United States versus Canada, and specifically when it comes to the use of deadly force?
I do see it as a difference in the fact that the right to bear arms in the United States means just about every person you encounter could virtually be armed. And I certainly know from Jane Finch area, the individuals that would be armed would be out arming us in their type of weaponry. They would have much more powerful guns and they would have illegal bullets, and so it does not put one in a safe scenario. But as far as the Canadian versus US, I think it's just difference in laws, and that must make it very difficult for officers knowing that each person they encounter could be heavily armed.
L.A., tell me what makes a good police officer.
Someone who listens and can be very adept at taking in the environment, very quick to make an assessment of danger for his partner, for others, quick to respond, knows their laws, their bylaws, they know procedure, and they stick to it, but they use discretion and they use common sense, and they have a quick read. That's a good police officer.
That's kind of a tough question, and I've had some interesting answers, but I think it's important as we talk about this.
If you listen to someone there's not been one person that I've ever arrested that said they were a bad person and they did something for the wrong reason. Every person feels that they were put in a position or a corner or they had no other choice. If you listen to that, you will have amazing evidence, and you'll also get a bigger picture. The scope becomes much larger. You have to listen very carefully and watch and put it all together, and not necessarily make quick judgments until you have all of the information.
Do you ever get past the lights and the sirens, the adrenaline rush, the authority, the badge, the gun? Do you ever get past that?
That's a multi-part question, because the lights and siren, I think when that goes on, your brain snaps into, you have an adrenaline rush for the sake of being able to take in more of your environment, to hear better, to take in a lot of detail, to be able to drive there safely, to make sure you distinguish who the victim is, who is the accused, where is that accused, what's the assessment of danger. So I think the lights and siren really put you into that functional mode. As far as authority, that was never why I joined, and I think there's different personalities that do join for that, and you need that personality. But there's also the other personality that you want to help your community, you want to make a difference, and you seek justice, and you need both those personalities. So,
L.A., do you think that being a police officer is a calling, or do you think that anybody could be a cop?
No, it's a calling. I think the people that say they've wanted to do this their entire life, or aspects of it, will make the most resilient officers, because I think they've had years to prepare themselves emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, family-wise, relationally, to do this incredibly difficult job. If you've got a lot of education and you want to be employed, policing is an excellent job, but I don't know if you have the spirit and the fortitude for the intensity unless you really start working at it in your training and continually. I think it is a calling, and you need to daily calculate what you're going into, and you also daily need to debrief from it in order to contain your emotion and to connect with it, so you don't numb out, or you don't get angry, or you don't give up. It is a very difficult job emotionally, so I think there's two different types of people that come into policing, and also that third type, if they join because it's a good career path, that's great for family life and great for a paycheck, but this job asks so much more of you than a paycheck could ever compensate.
Tell me about the stress of the job and how you manage that stress.
Humor on your shift, humor with your partner, humor in yourself. You look for the absurdity of everything that you are involved in, just how ironic some things are, or how random they are, or how disgusting they're. Like, you just call it, and you may not be able to say it, but you just identify with it in your character and in your personal conversation, so that you put it in perspective. And you don't say the whole world's like that, you don't say everyone's like that, but that particular scenario was really messed up, it was really dangerous, or it was really intensely sad, tragic, disastrous. You identify it. And as you take your uniform off, put your street clothes on to go home, you start to take those layers off with your day. And as you get in your car, for me personally, I would drive about 40 minutes home, and during that time I would give myself permission to either be sad or angry or feel badly for the victim, or to be disturbed by what I saw, so that it wasn't normal. I had to say, this is not normal what I saw today, and put it in perspective of my life. And by a certain point in my drive home, I would say, okay, now I've dealt with it. If I have nothing to bring through the door with my family, I've left it and my travel's home. And by the next couple miles before I got home, I would now say, what am I going to do when I get home? What am I going to have for dinner? How am I going to spend my time and recharge for the next day? So that's how I dealt with it. I also had a confidant to be able to speak frankly about my emotions about the job and other people's emotions about the job, people I worked with, just to get that encouragement. My mom was my biggest supporter.
Is she still alive?
She is.
Where does she live?
She lives in the Barrie area. She was an emergency room nurse married to a homicide investigator. There was not much that I can talk about that would throw her off her game. And that's not always the case for some people. They don't have that safe place to land, and they don't have that person who has that intestinal fortitude to be able to hear such tragedy. So I feel sorry for them. I hope that they have a good therapist or friend that they can speak to.
L.A., how has your career changed the person that you are?
I'm very appreciative of health, family, life itself, the ability to live in a great country with a decent legal system, with an honest system. I feel that as police officers, you get to see people at their very worst, and that is a gift, really, to be able to see humanity from a perspective that not many other career choices professionals get to see. It's a very interesting walk. You can never be the same person after that. You see the world through a lens that's a very unique lens.
Cool. I like what you said. I've never heard it like that. That's good. I agree with you. L.A., tell me about the human element of the job, the human element of law enforcement. Because people think, cops are tough, they don't cry, they're like Rambo. Not that they don't have any problems, but tell me about the human side of the job and some personal experiences that you might have.
Well, it's, you can't show weakness when you're on the job, and certainly when you're called to a very intense crime scene, whether it's a body or someone has been hurt violently, or you're having to put someone in handcuffs, so you have to use force. You can't show emotion, you just have to do the job at hand. You have to look at what's before you as evidence. If it's, you have a job to do, you have protocol and procedure. My best opportunity to help a victim was to have the best case prepared. So I had to be very detail-oriented and have verbatim statements and to make sure that I was very accurate in my details. So I think that kept the focus while you're on the job. You don't have time really to deal with the emotion. Unfortunately, you're not there to comfort people, although through your overflow you can in the right moment, but you're not there necessarily for that. You're there to make sure that a person comes to justice or that the evidence is preserved. But if you can, during that moment, sometimes a kind word to someone would make that feel more that you're connecting. Even with the person that you've arrested, just listen to them and hear why they got into that scenario, why they felt that was their only choice. Just listen.
This is something that has come out in all the interviews that I've done. This human element of law enforcement, the human part of a police officer. When I did an interview last fall with Stephen LeDrew on CP24, that came out. I said something to the effect that, cops have this rough exterior, but there's still a human side to them, And I think that's a good question. So that leads me into my next thought with you. If you could change the public's perception of law enforcement, what would that be? That's a good question.
Yeah, I just want to think about my answer because there's so many things right now in the news that have shown the police not to be caring. Again, not every police officer is the same quality of character. They're human beings. Some have been chiseled by the job and they're a little tougher. some have been broken by the job, and some are in mid-stride. So each police officer is a human being with different set of experiences and background to be able to deal with the public. Everyone deals with it differently. Working with different partners, it was always very interesting to see how it was going to progress based on the attitude that they brought to a call. Of course, I was a police officer on the street for most of it. Sometimes I did special projects, and that was a totally different type of policing. Again, it depends on how a person relates to a police officer. Is it being pulled over for a traffic stop? Is it taking a report for a break and enter and their home has been violated? So it depends really where the person is meeting that officer. Are they meeting them in community services? Are they meeting them, at the morgue? I mean, each person's experience with an officer based on why they're having that experience will be very different. The thing with most people is that they will remember each encounter with an officer. So if officers could remember just that point, that they are influential on how people see the entire service, I think that's important for police officers. For the public to see police officers as doing the best they can with a set of rules, I think that's fair. I think that would be very fair.
What advice would you give to young police officers?
I've given the same advice I received, and that is be true to yourself. Do not conform to mob or group mentality. You don't need to swear if everyone else is swearing. You don't need to go drinking if everyone else is drinking, unless you feel like you want to go and be with your platoon. Stay true to yourself. Don't conform. Know who you are and stay true to that person. I was told in regards to swearing by an officer, a female officer, when I first joined, and she said, women on the job tend to want to be like the men, but what makes you good at your job is the fact that you come in from a female perspective, and your unique perspective, not just female, but just you as you going in. You have something to bring to the job that is unique from someone else, and keep that, and learn also from others, but keep who you are. You will never see a crime scene the same as someone else. You will never be able to communicate like someone else. Do it the best you can do, and that's what you bring to the job. If you swear, you have the words, but you don't have the tune. So just be yourself. You don't have to be like the guys.
L.A., who do you think the real heroes of law enforcement are?
Those who go the entire distance intact with a good attitude and encourage the others on the platoons or in the squads or in the units to do the best they can. Those who are developers and teachers and educators within each unit. Those who bring positivity to work. Those who keep their focus and they positively influence other people, because it's a job that can suck the life and spirit of a person very quickly. So I think the true heroes are the ones that see the big picture and go the distance and help others go the distance.
What do the words "to serve and protect" mean to you?
That you rush in when others are rushing out, that you see the needs of others, and you trust your training and you trust your partner, and you do the best you can in every scenario, regardless of how chaotic it is, how dangerous it is, or how mundane it is. That's the other part of policing. It can be quite mundane, and you still need to keep your sharpness, and you can never be complacent. So to serve and protect is to bring your best game every shift and try to pace yourself, because you get pretty tired. So serve and protect means that you bring your best game for your partner. You bring your best game so you can make it home to your family, that you serve the community with the best attitude.
We've talked about post-traumatic stress and the fact that you have post-traumatic stress.
Yes, I do.
Why would an officer take their own life?
Despair and loss of hope, hopelessness and helplessness. A paramilitary type organization like policing, it's very structured. There's a natural tendency to conform, And it can easily, if you're not careful, change you. You have to find your motive to go to work, your incentive to go to work, your incentive to keep life in perspective. And the things that you see continually can avalanche you after a number of years. So keeping healthy, keeping strong, keeping fresh, not piling everything up, being able to speak about things, process, I think is very, very important. Post-traumatic stress for police officers is accumulative. It's also avoidance, and it's also denial. So it's also considered to be very shameful if you are impacted by the volume of your calls or the depth of your call. It's considered to be shameful that you're losing your touch or you're losing your edge. But I think policing did not give me my PTSD. It was broken police officers that gave me my PTSD. So it is so important to understand just the ripple effect and the ripple effect to splash other people with a cesspool of damaged lives is, and so to keep that water clean, I think, is the best advice. Just don't become a cesspool of anger or despair. Try to keep your balance of hope, and if it's time to give up your job, it's time to give up your job, because really the point is that you retire intact or you live your life with the best quality possible. And there's sometimes a season when that officer needs to take a step back and say they cannot go into the front line at that juncture. They need to have some time to recalibrate and recharge. And it's very important. And if they don't, they can definitely impact and hurt other people.
Just briefly, you mentioned that broken police officers gave you PTSD. I'm not really sure I understand that, but if you could for a moment expound just briefly on what you meant by that.
Well, I can't really explain it without expounding. My first assignment to 52 Division on that shift, a number of officers handled their stress in ways that were socially acceptable. Many drank very heavily. Some were very angry, and some medicated, self-medicated, and that's a very terrifying trifecta of situations. So I was badly assaulted by an intoxicated officer and caused irreparable neck damage to me, which I have to live with the rest of my life. It was not seen at that time to be post-traumatic stress in that person, but today I think we have much more education and support and opportunity to have a peer support or intervene, to have a frank dialogue. But it took the last 32 years of what I've witnessed in my career to see that ship change course. Most likely improved, but there's still room for more improvement.
Are there others out there like yourself that have gone through similar experiences, or?
I can't really say that they were assaulted on the job by another officer. Hazing was pretty common when I first started. And I'm sure that probably took its toll in certain people, and it was a way to see if you were trustworthy and if you could hold your stuffing. And you just didn't say anything and you moved on and you became part of that squad or unit because you were tough. But that's not to say it didn't impact that person who had to go through that. So I do believe there's officers that have had that experience.
L.A., what would you say to somebody out there possibly watching this at some point in time who is contemplating taking their own life? In a few words, what would you say to this person?
You feel like you're all alone, but you are not. There are so many that feel the same way, that will be able to have a frank and honest dialogue with you. Step out of your comfort zone, because this too will pass. You will get through this, but to have a great support system, even if it's one or two trusted fellow officers or people even outside that have a clear understanding of what trauma is, even if you don't realize that's what is impacting you or driving this desperation, or the pain, the emotional pain is so intense. There are others that will be able to walk alongside you. You are never alone. There are those who will understand. There are those that can help you. Just reach out, pick up the phone, search it out. There's always someone that will take the time. Have 4 or 5 people on your call list. You know, in policing, you should always have a safety list of who your immediate contacts are in a tough spot. Be careful of drugs and alcohol. They will slant and depress you. They will not allow you to see the circumstances as clearly. They will impact your mood. Try just to reach out. There is hope, and you can't sometimes do it by yourself. You need that encouragement and perspective.
That was good, thank you. LA, how did you know it was time for you to retire?
I got hurt on the job, so I was involved in 5 on-duty accidents. I was hit by a drunk driver with an impaired in the back. And it was accumulation of injuries that just made it more and more physically difficult. I did not retire as an active duty. I retired on the sick list, which in itself held great shame that I just couldn't get to work. But I have mobility issues, and I just needed a quality of life to be able to make it to the finish line. So I had to make that decision for myself and my family. And my doctors actually made it for me, because I would have gone regardless. I would have gone, but I love my work. And the entire time I was off, I still wanted to get back there. But it's just physically not possible.
LA, I'm not sure if this next question really applies to you, but can you tell me about the last day on the job for you? And was there a time where you had to turn in your badge and your gun?
The last day, just driving into the unit where you turn over your badge, and I looked at it, and it meant so much to me. I'm 4th generation police officer. My great-grandfather was chief of police in Johannesburg, South Africa, and my grandfather walked the same beat as I did. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize it till after, and my father walked the same beat in Chinatown in 52 Division in Yonge and Dundas. And I walked that beat, and it just felt, when I turned my badge in, it was like the longest relationship with any entity or relationships I had had in my life. It was very difficult to put it on the counter.
Your grandfather died at 26. Was that police related?
He had a acute appendicitis that ruptured on duty.
And you didn't know that both of you walked the same beat until years later?
Not till we started going through family scrapbooks. Yeah, even his badge number is only one badge or one number off of mine. It was pretty haunting, actually. Both my maternal and paternal side contribute to that 4 generations. But so again, the shame of not being able to continue my career when so many great people before me. My father had a fabulous career in homicide and well respected, and worked right up until a couple of days before he died of cancer. He would go for cancer treatment and go back to work, and it was just that's the protocol of just all in. You know, you're all in.
LA, do you ever wish you were still in a patrol car?
Every day. Every day. I miss it every day. I know the job has changed and people have changed, but there's just nothing like it when this is what you're good at. And you enjoy people, and you enjoy society, and it's a good fit when you're that type of person. So I miss it terribly.
In the United States Marines, there's a saying in the Marine Corps, once a Marine, always a Marine. There are no former Marines. Is it the same in law enforcement? Once a cop, always a cop?
Absolutely. You can't unlearn hypervigilance. You can't unlearn always checking exits. You can't unlearn those people are around you just taking check and taking stock of your environment and who's a threat and who's not a threat and where's your personal space and boundary and can you get through a situation if it goes south. You can't unlearn that. Can't unlearn some of the learned fear inherent too of the dangers out there, and especially as a parent, and you know what the world is capable of, and you know the depravity of humanity at times. Certain people are very evil people, and there are sadistic people out there, and there are sociopaths and psychopaths, and as a parent, you just never learn what, or unlearn what you've taken from your career. So you have to put it in perspective and in check and just have faith that your family's going to be fine, and you can't overprotect them and over-monitor. You just have to let them live their lives. But it comes from policing, I think.
Big question. So is there life after law enforcement?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's very different, and there's a grieving process, especially when it was such a benefit to your life and so meaningful and impactful and fulfilling. So for myself, being off sick because of injury, first of all, I had my injuries to deal with, which were quite compounding and complex, and so that was a difficult, and that actually was a good distraction from the sadness of missing my platoon and the friendships that you bond, good, deep, meaningful, honest friendships.
You said grieving, like the loss of a job? Is that what you meant?
Well, for myself, because it wasn't a date that I could look forward to and start to unwind and build other things into my life, which is most practical. If you know you have a retirement date, you can start honing activities and hobbies and build your life. But when it's just one day you're in the job and the next day you're not, and you're all in time-wise up to that point, I had nothing really to retire to or to be off and do other than look after my health and my children. So in that regard, it left a huge void, and I missed it quite a bit. But if you're a golfer or you paint or write, then you can start honing some of your crafts and interests and have something to look forward to. And I think that's very important. There is a huge withdrawal. I guess that's the point I was making in policing, because the adrenaline's gone, the excitement's gone, the camaraderie, the purpose. It's a very purpose-driven career, and it's very regimented and organized. You always have order to some degree of your routine and being on time and being somewhere and being prepared. When you don't have that, you need something else to fill it, to keep that. I think you're just very driven by that organization and routine. You need to have that.
LA, a question I've asked all my military veterans in the United States and Canada at the end of my interviews. What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom, being at peace with yourself, being at peace with where your life has taken you, that often that path you have no choice over the path. Life is random, and being at peace with that. Having acceptance and sometimes forgiveness, and have patience with yourself. That's freedom. Not really caring what other people think, because they don't really know all the circumstances, so they don't know you. And you don't know their circumstances, and you don't know them. So give them the benefit of the doubt, and that gives you freedom.
So what haven't I asked you today? Did I ask you everything? Sometimes things will come to mind after I turn off the camera, like, oh, I should have said that.
I'd love to say the importance of family. Really, family takes a big hit sometimes in policing just by the mere fact that shift work is so disruptive to routine of a family. But try your best when you're off to be present and turn that tape off in your head of thinking about work, or just be present with your kids. They grow up so quickly. Your spouse is so important to who you are and helping you get through it. Don't take them for granted. Try not to judge your family by what you see at your job. Maintain your humor. Stay well balanced. Keep physically, mentally, spiritually fit as possible in your downtime. Yeah, just the balance is so important. You can't take that for granted. You need to laugh a lot and find great people off the job that tell fun stories, and you just have to accept that not everyone lives at the high adrenaline speed of policing, and enjoy those relationships that keep you balanced.
I agree.
There's that tendency to just be with other police officers because they get you and they speak the same language, and the humor rolls off and it's usually quite dark and they're not offended. You try bringing that out at a Jack and Jill shower and you're not quite accepted for that. So the tendency is just to stick to policing as your circle of influence, and really you need to be able to infiltrate, and not infiltrate is the wrong word, still be able to be mainstream everywhere you go. You have to hone those skills.
So when you're driving down the road today and there's crazy drivers all around you, do you want to give chase? Do you want to go after them?
The things you see when you don't have a gun, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think driving is much more aggressive since I've been on the job, whether it's from people's video games or faster cars, I don't know, but it just seems very aggressive, and I worry about our highways, actually.
Did you arrest those people in a skirt?
No, that was our dress uniform,
Okay.
but I was issued a
I
skirt.
was thinking,
Yeah.
you're under arrest, you have the right to remain silent.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you on camera for your service to your community and country, and for this interview. I think it was awesome, and it's just a pleasure to have you here and be a part of my project.
Well, thank you for chronicling all of the stories of officers who have done some extraordinary things in policing. Thank you.
Well, you're one of my guys. Is that okay I say guys?
I love it. Yeah.